Minister. It's very good to see you here again. The first of the 2021 meetings, and we have you twice more this year. We're very grateful for that. Our main session today is about three topics. Obviously, COVID is still top of our political agenda, but we're going to start with the UK's place in the world because of the upcoming COP26 summit and the Defence White Paper and the integrated review. Then we will come to COVID, and then we'll do the economy. And if we please have time, we will have time to ask the government's views about lifting the COVID restrictions on Parliament to get Parliament back to effectiveness. So first, can I go to Darren Jones, Chairman of the Bay Select Committee?
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. The world has to decarbonise by 45% by 2030. So far, climate action plans submitted at the UN have only got us 1% of that way. So will you be providing the COP unit with more resources to help countries improve their plans before they arrive at COP this November?
Darren, thank you very much. The COP26 summit is one of the single biggest priorities that any government could have domestically, let alone internationally, and it's a massive job, and we're throwing everything at it. Every department in Whitehall is now thinking about COP and how we can reduce our emissions, deliver on our NDC. The COP unit is the Alok, the President and his team are well staffed at the moment, but clearly we will be looking to beef that up as we go forward through the year, and I hope that will be of some reassurance to you, because I agree with you that they need to be properly staffed. But so far, in terms of our international reach, you should know that after the UK became the first major country to go for a net zero target, so far, long before November, we have China, the United States, Japan, Germany, Brazil, Canada, France, Korea, Spain, Switzerland, Sweden, Kazakhstan, Austria, Chile, Ireland, Norway, Portugal, Denmark, Hungary, Finland, New Zealand, Costa Rica, Slovenia, Fiji, the Marshall Islands, and Andorra, all committed to net zero targets, something that was thought to be completely, very wildly ambitious by the UK when we did it, but you're now seeing country after country across the world coming into line with global Britain.
Thank you, Prime Minister. In the past few weeks, we've had the argument about the new coal mine in Cumbria. The Transport Secretary wants to make it cheaper to fly within the UK. The Green Homes grant has been cut by £1 billion, and presumably in cutting our aid budget, we're also cutting climate aid. Do you think other countries will listen to us when we ask them to be better on climate action?
Yes, because the UK's, thanks very much, but the UK's, first of all, the UK's NDC at 68% reductions on 1990 levels is a huge commitment. People can see how big that is, how determined we are. They also know that we have an incredible record of doing it. You know, the UK has already delivered very considerable cuts in CO2. Just in our, maybe in my political lifetime is longer than yours, but just in my political lifetime, we've done a colossal amount to decarbonise our country. I think when I was in 1970, when I was 6 years old, I think, and I doubt that you were even born. We were, I think, 90% of our emissions of our energy came from coal. That's now down to much less than 1%.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm afraid I'm limited on time, so we have to go back to the 1970s. I need to move on. It's been reported that you personally brokered the deal for the UK to spend £400 million buying the satellite company OneWeb, and that the Chancellor personally had to sign the cheque. Are both of those reported facts correct?
Well, I certainly the government was involved at all levels in doing the deal. I don't think I should comment exactly on the who did what, but it was I think that the ambition for the UK to have a presence in space and in the low Earth orbit market is a notable one and an important one. I think for too long the UK has been left behind in the space race. This is an area of colossal commercial importance, and we need to be there.
Prime Minister, I don't mean to cut in. I just wanted to know whether you and the Chancellor were personally involved in brokering that deal. But could I just ask, which budget line in government did the £400 million come from?
Well, the commitment, as you all know, is one that the whole of government has made. But if you're asking which department is responsible for space strategy, then the responsibility lies with the Secretary of State for BEIS. That's Kwasi Kwarteng.
Well, thank you for that, Prime Minister. And lastly, I understand that David Cameron contacted one of your special advisors in Number 10 to try and secure public funds for Greensill. Is that correct? That's news to me, but
any such contacts or whatever, of course, will be registered in the proper way.
Prime Minister, might I just say that in response to my question about whether you personally brokered the OneWeb deal, whether the Chancellor personally signed the cheque, and whether Mr Cameron was having private conversations with your special advisors, you've not provided an answer to any of those questions. And from a parliamentary scrutiny and oversight perspective...
Well, Darren, great respect to you. I don't wish in any way to disagree with what you've just said, but certainly on your point about contact between David Cameron, a former Prime Minister, and my office, or anybody in my office, I simply have no knowledge of that. That's news to me, is what I said to you. And on the deal with OneWeb, that was a deal obviously done by the government.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but I've enjoyed our time together. Back to you, Sir Bernard.
Unless the Public Accounts Committee wants to comment on that, I'll move straight on. Tobias Elwood.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Prime Minister. Can I very much welcome the Integrated Review publication spelling out Britain's vision and the growing threats that we face. But just parking aside how we might respond, Prime Minister, would you agree with this threat picture as drawn up from the Integrated Review? The security environment is deteriorating. Democracy and pluralism will continue to decline, with strains on our international institutions. Maritime tensions will increase. China's assertiveness will not diminish. Russia will continue to be a threat to European security. Threats of terrorism remain, and new domains of space and cyber pose significant challenges, and climate change will progressively impact on global food and water security. Sir, do you agree with that summary? Simple yes or no, please.
That sounds very sensible to me.
Well, as we concur on that, during the Cold War, defence spending was at 4% GDP. Today's threats are indeed more complex and more dangerous, yet we remain on a peacetime defence budget of just 2.2%. Now, we absolutely welcome the force structure shake-up. The investment in SF lethality, cyberspace resilience is also welcomed, but it's coming at a huge price with sweeping cuts to our conventional defence posture, exposing us to the very threats that you and I both agree are there. Is it not time to move Britain to a conflict footing and raise defence spending to at least 3%, not just to defend our interests, but to play a leadership role to counter growing global instability?
Tobias, I have a high regard for your expertise in this area, and you and I have discussed these questions many times. And I know that you care passionately about this subject. I'm just wish to be clear, the 2.2% is an increase. It's not that we're remaining at 2.2%. We've gone up to 2.2% as a result of the biggest investment in our armed forces in defence since the end of the Cold War, £24 billion investment. And it is a full spectrum investment. It covers everything from cyber to modernising and protecting our tanks, to enabling us to go ahead with the Future Combat Air System that I think will be essential for defending our skies in the future and enabling us to project force abroad. The UK is one of the few countries in the world able to project force at 8,000 miles or more, and this integrated defence, security and foreign policy review allows us to continue to do just that.
Thank you for that, but there are some concerns I have. The Ranger Brigade is very much welcome, but we're cutting our Marines to just 400. The Tempest you mentioned, also welcomed, but in order to pay for that in the future, we're having to cut back on the F-35s and indeed our Typhoons. And our special forces are going to lose their C-130 aircraft. I'd be very grateful if you could look at these details. But I am concerned of the wider picture, that we're not gauging ourselves up for what's coming over the hill. It does feel a little bit like there's competition in our time, and we are in denial as to the scale of threats that we face. Could I move on to another subject, which is to do with the Office of Veterans Affairs? News today has come out that there will be a 40% cut in the support here, with a reduction of its budget from 5 million to 3 million pounds. I know you're passionate about supporting our armed forces and the veterans as well. We've come a long way in providing that support. Could I ask you to revisit this decision?
There's no decision. Thanks very much, Tobias. There's no decision that's been taken about the Office of Veterans Affairs, and the spending on veterans is, after all, not primarily through that office. Although Johnny Mercer and his team do an outstanding job, we spend up to £18 million through the NHS on specific mental health services that are targeted at veterans. £10 million to support veterans' mental health charities. We have national insurance rebates for those that obviously subsidised for those that hire veterans, as well as cut price transport or free transport for veterans on public transport. Something that I remember actually pioneering when I was Mayor of London, and I'm very proud that we've taken that into government as well.
Thank you. My final question is to do with where we might be putting troops in at the most earliest occasion, and that is in Yemen. The ceasefire has been put forward by Saudi Arabia. A possible political solution could be secured. We are the UN Security Council penholder. You and I worked on this subject for some time. Would we be willing to provide troops, if requested, for a UN stabilization force?
We have indeed worked on it, Tobias, and I remember some of your very creative plans that you suggested to me, for instance, for a mission to consolidate Hodeidah and other projects vividly that we discussed. And I know how much you care about the peace and the security of Yemen. We, of course, back the UN-led approach that's been led by Martin Griffiths, as we both know. I do believe that's the best way forward. It's encouraging that there is a ceasefire now between the Saudi forces and the Houthis. We must hope that leads to serious political progress. I think that it was not realistic simply to say that the Houthis could not be negotiated with or talked to in any way. I don't think that was going to work. If you remember, that was a previous approach. I think we now do have an opportunity to go further. There has been no specific request or suggestion for UK engagement, but it's certainly something that we would be prepared to look at if the conditions were right. But I've got to stress, before everybody on the committee pricks up their ears, that Yemen, the conditions would really have to be very different from what they are now for us to go ahead with boots on the ground.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Can I just interject one point? The decision in the integrated review to raise the cap on the number of warheads came as something of a surprise. Continuous at sea deterrence has always been a bipartisan policy based upon quite a broad consensus. Of course, there are dissenters, but it has been a bipartisan policy. What measures are the government going to take to build the same kind of consensus around this more controversial decision about raising the cap on the number of warheads?
Thanks very much, Sir Bernard. I think that you obviously personally have a great deal of expertise in this field, and you're absolutely right to raise it. But it's crucial to stress that the number in question that's in the integrated review is a ceiling. It's not a target. We remain as a government committed to the minimum credible deterrent, and it's very important for everybody to understand that as well.
Well, I hope there will be open discussion as far as we can be open
Yes,
across the party divide.
Yes, and I think that it certainly ought to be possible on Privy Council terms for members of this committee to receive a briefing about the nature of the decisions.
Thank you. Moving on now to Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, on Monday you committed to spending £188 billion on defence over the coming 4 years, which is an increase of 14%. So I'm curious, how is there enough money in the public purse to increase defence spending, but not enough to maintain the UK's legal commitment to spend 0.7 of GNI on aid?
Sarah, thank you. And you asked me the same sorts of questions last time quite properly, because I think you certainly care about this issue greatly, and so do I. I think that being a great aid donor has been one of the most important features of our country, of global Britain, over the last few years. But I just want to try to reassure you that we still are. And £10 billion in a year, which is what we're giving this year in UK taxpayers' money, is a huge sum. We remain one of the biggest, if not the single biggest donor, European donor, for instance, to Yemen, which Tobias was just raising. And times you ask, how can we find the cash for this? And the answer is that times are very tight. We've had to spend £407 billion supporting our public services and our economy through COVID. And I think people do understand that these are the exceptional circumstances that are foretold in the 2015 Act, and that it is reasonable for us to deviate from that Act under these extreme circumstances.
Thank you, Prime Minister. In the integrated review, you argue that absolute poverty is set to be eliminated in Asia and Latin America by the 2030s, but by 2045, 85% of the poorest billion will live in Africa. You map out the projections of global population growth intersecting with climate change, poverty, conflict, instability, all being at their greatest in sub-Saharan Africa. So given this stark backdrop, why have you decided to so sharply cut development funding in Africa?
Well, thanks, Sarah. We haven't. We're still one of the biggest aid donors in Africa in the world, and we will continue to be so. We contribute, for instance, to look at the immediate concerns of the planet and of the African continent. We're one of the biggest donors to COVAX. I think we've given £548 million to the Global Vaccine Alliance. I think 1.6 billion to Gavi. And much of that funding goes to distributing vaccines to the poorest and neediest, particularly on the African continent.
Thank you. Prime Minister, I know that girls' education seems to be your personal development priority, and FCDO has said that it will place gender equality at the heart of UK's ODA work. But you are cutting funding to the International Planned Parenthood Foundation, which will lead to 7.5 million unintended pregnancies, 27 million unsafe abortions, and 22,000 maternal deaths, according to the Director General. You're also cutting by 60% an International Rescue Committee family planning programme in Sierra Leone for adolescent girls, a country where 1 in 17 die in childbirth. And you've cut another IRC project in Lebanon that would have provided vital gender-based violence and child protection services to 107,000 women and girls. And these are just the examples that we know of. How does that feel, Prime Minister, when your ambition and the reality are so starkly apart?
I don't want to, it's like no Prime Minister, nobody who cares about any of these issues could conceivably want to make these changes and these cuts now. I'm simply asking you and people watching to understand the particular difficulties that we face right now, our determination to get back to 0.7 when the fiscal position allows. But I think people will also understand our earnestness and our seriousness. I want to see another 40 million girls into education by 2025. That ambition is still there. We have the funding for that. We think we can do that. Our campaign is for 12 years although you've mentioned some things that we sadly can't do, there are plenty of things that we're going to continue to do. And our campaign is for 12 years of quality education for every girl in the world. And together with Uhuru Kenyatta later this year, we'll be leading the Girls' Education Summit to try to promote that cause. And it's something we're spending a great deal of money on it, but it's also about talking the issue up.
Hello, Prime Minister. Does that mean that you're therefore ring-fencing all of the money around girls' education and preventing violence against women and girls?
It's a priority of the government, and the programme will continue to the best of our abilities. And our target remains unchanged. We want another 40 million girls around the world to receive a quality education by 2025. So 40 million that wouldn't otherwise, without British intervention, get that education they need.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And finally, my committee is grateful for the support that you gave to keep us, but sadly your officials appear less pleased, as they're making it extremely difficult for Philip Barton to appear before us on the 13th of April to discuss the changes in the aid budget. So can I ask you to intervene and make him come in front of us, please?
I have intervened. Intervened. Philip Barton will appear, but I don't think he was, to be absolutely clear, Philip is a wonderful man. I don't believe he would have been remotely reluctant to come, but he's coming.
But thank you for that, because he's the accounting officer, I understand, for the very large aid budget. Can I just raise a point about the science component of the aid budget? You've got a letter from Greg Clark. You may not have this in your briefing, because the letter only went yesterday, but it points out that the government's announced that the base ODA allocation to UK research and innovation has reduced significantly as part of the cuts in the budget, because we're now taking Horizon out of the science budget. Can you address that too? That it's not in our intention to have a dip in science funding, but just because we've signed up to the Horizon programme. The Horizon programme was always...
Horizon, Bernard, as you know, is a wonderful pan-European project that is extremely costly, and the way it operates at the moment is that the UK spends a lot up front and doesn't get much back for a while. And so we're looking at that, but in the context of a huge increase in investment in science, in R&D generally. I don't think there's never been anything like it under any previous government. Another £24 billion.
The particular concern is the dip in funding creates discontinuity in existing funding programmes, which would be most unfortunate.
I'm aware of that, and I've discussed it with the Chancellor, with Patrick Vallance and others, and we want to make sure that scientists don't have that discontinuity that you talk about.
I'm most grateful. Angus Brendan McNeill on trade, please.
Thank you very much. This section, as we know, is the UK's place in the world, and just specifically on the UK's place in the world with a trade link and a topical link, Prime Minister. This weekend the clocks go forward to British summertime, and many people, of course, will be looking forward to the less dark evenings. Will this happen next year, Prime Minister? The EU are not going to do this, apparently, and according to the House of Commons Library, the UK has set no times for clock changes in 2022. So can you tell us, will the UK be copying the EU for and opting for longer, darker summer nights?
Right.
Or will you be maintaining British summertime, which would have the added benefit, of course, of putting our businesses on the same time zone as those in Europe, if you do?
Well, Angus, it's an extremely good question. The roadmap that we've set out for taking our country on the path of freedom, as you know, goes so far to June the 21st. We haven't looked forward to exactly what's going to be happening next spring in terms of the clocks, but I'm happy to take that one away.
So you could be the Prime Minister who kills British summertime then? Is this a possibility?
I will have a look at the suggestion that you've made, but it seems unlikely to me.
Okay, moving on a little bit, and looking at the world and democracy, of course, and respecting democracy on the ballot box. We know it's under threat in many places, and China, Russia, and places like Belarus play fast and loose with the relationship with the ballot box. I think it's important that we assert our commitment to democracy and the support for the outcomes of the ballot box. Now, I know you're not in favour at the moment of a referendum on Scottish independence, so I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about that if the Scottish people, or indeed the Welsh people, given the way polls are going, were to say at the ballot box that they wanted independence, would you respect the ballot box and that decision if it were to come about?
Well, yes, I'm glad you talk about respecting the ballot box, because there was, as you recollect, a vote on the on Scottish separation, on the breakup of the breakup, and I'm very keen to respect that vote.
But if the people vote in future, because you said that the general election of 2019 was a once-in-a-lifetime general election, and I hope that doesn't mean you're thinking that's the end of democracy in the UK. I'm talking about the future, and firstly, I'm sure there will be more general elections in the UK for as long as it continues to exist in its current form. But if the Scottish people, and indeed the Welsh people, were to vote for independence, Prime Minister, remember, people in China and Russia and Belarus are watching you. Do you respect what the people would say at the ballot box?
Well, Angus, I don't think even my worst enemies or biggest detractors would say that I'd at any stage promised to abolish general elections or
you did say it was once in a generation.
Trying to get rid of them. And there's a clear difference between the two things. When you ask people to vote on a highly controversial and divisive issue, an issue that breaks up family relationships, that is extremely toxic and divisive, and you tell them that this is going to happen only once in a generation, I think you should stick to it.
Well, I think what's toxic and divisive is obstructing democracy, and I hope you wouldn't do that, Prime Minister. I hope you would respect democracy and not make fast and loose as we're seeing in China and in Russia and in Belarus and in such places. I'll give you one more chance. Do you respect the ballot box?
I greatly respect the ballot box, what I will say about another referendum, the independence separation referendum that the SNP continually campaigned for, I think it striking and inapposite that now, when we're trying to come together to come through a pandemic, to build back better together, that instead of talking about any other aspect of global Britain and all the things that we do together, our armed forces, our security services, our scientists working together around the world, which is one of the most moving and extraordinary things, that all we hear about is breaking up the union.
Order. The Prime Minister. Order. The Prime Minister.
Well, I've finished my answer, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Moving on to CPTPP and the Pacific, the comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership that the UK is interested in. Do we have any figures on the GDP gain? So far, the UK has left the European Union, and it's got an awful lot of paperwork, so much so that my fine oysters this week were saying it was £500 extra alone in 38 pages. It's a 4.9% damage to GDP event. So far, there's been no trade deal signed that gains any of this loss to GDP. Any idea what the GDP gain might be from CPTPP?
The overall benefits of trade deals are well attested, and
any numbers?
The ambition of this country is to continue to secure them. We've done about more than 60 trade deals already, and the countries that we've secured deals with cover 80% will cover 80% of UK trade by the end of next year. You're making a serious point about the detriment to exporters of some products, particularly fishing products. Earlier this year, and there are problems continuing, and I humbly accept that. I think that it was in some ways regrettable that some of our continental friends didn't perhaps make life as easy as they could have done. We are doing what we can. we're doing what we can to redress the matter. We've got a £23 million fund to support the fishing industry with some of the bureaucratic problems, but also a £100 million fund to enable Scottish fishing to build up in preparation, Angus, in preparation for the time when we control access to every and the right to fish every fish in Scottish waters.
Yeah, okay, back to trade. We know there's no trade deal, no new trade deal, and the trade deals you refer to are rollover trade deals, which are the sort of things that are given no extra gain because we had them in the first place anyway. So we've lost about 4.9% of GDP. We've gained nothing so far. The best an American trade deal can give you which is the best one, 0.2%. So it's equivalent to losing £4.90 and gaining 20 pence. Australia is worth about 2 pence. New Zealand is worth about a penny. I'm trying to find out, what do you think CPTPP is worth? Some people are saying that's not worth very much either. It's worth between maybe a penny or 3 pence.
Well, global free trade is something. Global free trade is something that is of great value, and UK exports actually rose last year, and I think we're now the fifth biggest exporter in the world, with less than 1% of the global population. That's a stunning achievement, and it's thanks to the UK working together with a great UK single market, exporting to the rest of the world with uninterrupted supply chains. And I think it would be foolhardy for anybody, I can't believe that you would even think of it, foolhardy for anybody to detach Scotland from the rest of the UK economy and break up our supply chains.
Wales and Scotland are
Order. I think you've run over your time, Angus. Thank you very much. Moving on to Stephen Crabb, the Welsh Select Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. A vaccination programme aside, why have so many other parts of the pandemic response across the constituent nations of the United Kingdom been fragmented, disjointed, and divisive? What went wrong with the Four Nations approach?
Stephen, I'm not sure I'm going to accept the premise. Actually, there are clearly competencies that the devolved administrations have, and it's very important that messaging should be direct and as local as possible, and that's been a good thing. We've worked together very closely, and if you look at the roadmap that we've set out, it's actually very similar to those that are being followed around the whole of the UK, and you rather sort of I think dismiss the vaccination programme as though it didn't show the benefits of the union, but plainly it has, and it's been incredible to go around the country. And Angus would concede Scottish scientists in Livingston, or Scottish postgrads in Glasgow and university doing the testing that we depend upon to isolate the genomic sequence of the bug throughout the whole of the UK. British Army people distributing vaccines across the whole country. It's been an amazing union effort.
Mr. Crabb.
Yeah, thank you. The point about the vaccination programme, it was based on central government decision-making, particularly around procurement, rather than leaving it to four separate administrations to make up their own schemes and make up their own rules around this. Can I ask you, Prime Minister, do you think it was a mistake 12 months ago not to deploy central civil contingencies measures to be able to lead a genuine UK-wide response?
There are some people who argue that. I think there will be a time will come when we can look back and evaluate the way the messaging worked and the impact of the way we did it, and lots of people, and that will be one of the things I know that we'll be looking at in the inquiry. One of the things we're trying to do now, Stephen, with the new UK health security agencies, is not to take away powers from the devolved administrations, but to make sure that we concert our energies and our thinking more closely together.
Mr. Graham.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, you've previously spoken about the good cooperation you felt that's happened with the devolved administrations. The Welsh First Minister, when he was in front of my committee 3 weeks ago, said in contrast that he doesn't really have a relationship with you. He described it as a remote relationship. He complained that you don't talk to him. So what do you think, Prime Minister, should be the appropriate amount of time that a UK Prime Minister invests in building and maintaining, sustaining relationships with the First Ministers of the devolved administrations?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that Mark Drakeford doesn't feel he gets enough time with me. I will do what I can to rectify that. I've had some very good meetings and very good conversations with him, but clearly the way it works is that the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster generally has been chairing the meetings involved, and that's how it has tended to work, and it's been pretty effective. And as I said earlier on, it's a system that has produced much more unity than is commonly supposed from the coverage.
Do you think we would have a stronger union by a Prime Minister investing more direct time themselves with the First Ministers, or is it fine just to devolve that function almost entirely to the CDL?
I think that the role of the Prime Minister of the UK is to lead the whole of the UK, and I think I'm very much in favour of the Council of the Isles, for instance, where we come together as representatives across the whole of the British Isles to talk about issues that matter to us. On the other hand, I don't think that we want to turn our deliberations into a kind of mini EU, if I may say so, Stephen.
Fine. So just finally and very, very quickly, Prime Minister, if there was a new First Minister in Scotland after the Scottish parliamentary elections, would you choose to invest more time in a relationship with them? Is that something you would decide to do?
Well, I hope I've made my point about the way I think that this should work. I'm the Prime Minister of Scotland as well as of the whole of the UK, and obviously I need a good relationship with everybody, and I talked many times to Nicola, to Mark, to Michelle and Arlene, and continue to do so, and that's the way it should be. But what I don't think would necessarily be right is to have a sort of permanent council, as it were, of the kind that is taking place tomorrow in Brussels. I don't think that's the model we're after.
Great. Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
As we get to the end of this first section about our place in the world, how will the devolved governments and devolved parliaments be engaged in the COP26 preparations?
Well, they will be, or they're already involved, because the COP26 is taking place in Glasgow, and indeed I'd just point out to Angus that it's one of the beauties of the Union that the UN brings this summit to the UK, to Glasgow, and it's thanks to our collective membership of the Union that we're able to host it in Glasgow. And that's a great thing. So there's all sorts of conversations going on about the look and feel of the summit, how it's going, what it's going to involve, the fringe, all that kind of stuff.
Right, we'll move on to our next section about COVID, and we start with Jeremy Hunt, the Chairman of the Health Committee.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. I want to start with the vaccine issues in the news today. You have been totally clear about your opposition to vaccine nationalism, vaccine protectionism. But if British lives were at risk, do you rule out taking measured and proportionate retaliation to discourage the EU from impeding legally binding contracts for our vaccines?
Jeremy, thank you very much for the question, and you're right to follow this issue as closely as you are. The the partnership we have with our European colleagues is very, very important. We continue to work with them. Vaccines, as you know, are the product of international cooperation. I don't think that blockades of either vaccines or of medicines or of ingredients for vaccines are sensible, and I think that the long-term damage done by blockades can be very considerable. I would just gently point out to anybody considering a blockade or an interruption of supply chains that companies may look at such actions and draw conclusions about whether or not it is sensible to make future investments in countries where arbitrary blockades are imposed.
But what's clear is that although you wish our European friends well, you're not taking anything off the table in terms of a British response to decisions this week.
Our priority is to continue the vaccine rollout, to vaccinate the British people. We'll do everything necessary that we can to ensure that happens. We are on course to vaccinate groups 1 to 9, JCVI groups 1 to 9 by April the 15th. Everybody over 50. And I don't know whether you've had one yet, Jeremy.
I had my jab. Right.
You've had it.
Yes.
You're much younger. There you go.
Yes. I still got the virus, but 3 days afterwards, so the immunity hadn't set in.
You got the virus 3 days after the jab.
Yeah, very bad luck it was. But
I'm very sorry to hear that.
I'm very pleased. The jab probably made the symptoms much less. I want to move on, if I may, because one thing that's become very clear in the pandemic has been the vulnerability of the social care sector, where, as we know, 29,000 lives were lost in care homes. Now, we've had 12 white papers, green papers, consultations, but you did something different in your very first speech as Prime Minister. You said you would fix the crisis in social care once and for all with a clear plan and make sure every older person was treated with dignity and respect. Do those words still stand? They do, and you'll have heard them many times, Jeremy, you and I, since we stood on about 58 platforms together and recited a virtually identical script on that point. Good. Well, we do agree on that.
But the serious answer to
before you go on, Prime Minister, I'm so sorry. It's just that time is short. But
sure.
The reason I ask it is because last week the NHS got £6.6 billion for COVID costs, but there was no mention of social care in the budget at all. And I just wonder if you can understand the frustration of 1.6 million people in the sector who feel they're always treated as the poor relation. Yeah. And I just wonder, will you be the first Prime Minister to say that social care will always be treated as equally important as the NHS?
Yes, and it was one of your achievements, Jeremy, to turn it into the Department of Health and Social Care. And I thought that was the right thing to do because there is one of the problems that we have, and I don't want to go on about this for too long, is the gulf between the NHS and social care, into which so many people fall, and that's the problem we need to fix. And if you're going to ask me, do we need a plan to do it, a long-term plan, a 10-year plan, then the answer is yes, and the government will be bringing forward our proposals on social care and social care reform later this year.
Fantastic. Final question from me, Sir Bernard. Is social care going to get a mention in the forthcoming Queen's speech?
I think it's highly likely, but I would not wish to anticipate the gracious speech at this stage.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Moving on to Meg Hillier, Chairman of the PAC.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, you say regrets. You've had a few over the last year. Which mistake do you most regret?
Meg, thank you. I think that there are all sorts of things that I look back on and I wonder whether we could have done differently. I wouldn't want to, as it were, to make a mistake about my biggest mistake and single out the wrong one. I think there are all sorts of things that, as I've said before, we didn't initially understand about COVID, and we didn't get the effect of the asymptomatic transmission, which fed into the care homes epidemic that Jeremy's just been talking about. You heard Patrick and Chris at the press conference yesterday talking about some of the things that we still think about and discuss. We're learning the whole time, Meg, and what we want is a proper inquiry, as I said earlier on today in the House, a proper inquiry in due course when we can consecrate the time.
Okay, well, Prime Minister, some of that's around the science, and we recognise that science has changed, but what about what Lord Macpherson described as the most wasteful and inept public spending programme of all, Test and Trace, which you promised would be world-beating? Then you promised the moonshot, and your government has committed £37 billion to, those are not all yet spent. Are you content with how that's gone?
Actually, I think that Test and Trace has been an extraordinary achievement. If you said to me, did they get everything right first time? No. And that's not surprising, given what...
Okay, so Prime Minister,
can I complete this, because it's incredibly important.
But no one's dreamt out, nor does my committee, that it ramped out testing, but it's costing £37 billion if it spends through the money that's been allocated to it. Do you think it's value for that money?
80% of the spending, Meg, goes on literally on labs, on testing, on giving people the results that they so desperately need. And it's not just that individuals need those results, but it's that massive testing operation that allows us to know where the disease is prevalent, what type of variant it may be. We do half the genomic sequencing anywhere in the world. It's thanks to NHS Test and Trace that we know whether the disease is going up and down in localities, and that gives us the tools to fight it. It's been absolutely indispensable.
Well, one of the tools, the clear tools to fight it, is the tracing, Prime Minister. And that's the bit that Baroness Harding herself says is a challenge to get people to isolate once you've traced them. So do you have any regrets about how you've rolled out that programme overall for the money that you spent on it? I mean, I could list many others, but I'm just focusing on this one for now. Do you have any regrets? Do you think it could have been done better or differently? And crucially, what do you think you're going to get for £37 billion ongoing for the future? What's that going to deliver for the British public?
Well, let me repeat what it does. And if you're arguing for spending more money on the tracing as opposed to the testing, then we can talk about that. But we give people a support if they need it to isolate. Councils have been given tens of millions of pounds extra to help people to isolate. About 9 million people have been helped to isolate who would otherwise have been in the transmission chain. And that's a very valuable thing. But what Test and Trace really does is it enables us to know what is happening with the pandemic in a very granular way. And that is absolutely crucial if you're going to fight it.
Okay.
And
well,
given
the vaccine success, do you think that Test and Trace is still worth the money? As you say, you're going to have a review, it's going to be a public inquiry that will look at all these questions. Do you think, now we've got the vaccine programme rolling out and projections that will be rolling out year after year, that £37 billion on Test and Trace is still good value for money?
I think if you're asking me, should we have spent, and I think it's so far £5 billion up to November. You're right in the overall figure that you mentioned for the whole budget. Should we be spending money on this scale to isolate where the disease is prevalent, where it isn't, to see what's happening in younger groups, to see what's happening in older groups? Every morning, I chair a meeting where I look at the data, the dashboard, and every week it has been getting better and better and more detailed, and our understanding of what we're dealing with has grown. And I think it has been of crucial importance to us in knowing when the disease is rising again and what we need to do to deal with it.
So what you're saying is it's really been a tool to map it. That's what you're saying. Can I just check on one thing about the
It's been a tool to fight it. It's been a tool to fight it.
Well, in terms of decisions that you've made, do you regret not making a decision to close down more quickly at Christmas?
That decision was made entirely in the light of what we discovered about the new variant, and you'll remember, which again was made possible thanks to the understanding of what was happening. Was made possible thanks to test and trace, and it was because we were able to see the B117 variant, the so-called Kent variant or English variant, moving so fast that the scientists were able to make their determination about the increased velocity of transmission, and so that's why we made that decision.
Was that test and trace, or wasn't that specialist scientists who had to track down the epidemiological trend for that variant? I think that was slightly
it's both, because you can't do one without the other.
Well,
thank you. Very last question.
Do you have any regrets, Prime Minister, about your decision at Christmas, which saw London railway stations and others people crowding onto crowded trains, spreading virus?
Of course, I regret all the disruption to people's lives, the loss of education, the effects of lockdown, the loss of business, the loss of earnings. Nobody in my position could conceivably have had to take the decisions that I've taken and not regret it. Of course I do. But I think
that Christmas decision.
I think
that was very much your personal decision.
I think that was I think it was the right thing to do in the light of the evidence that we had. And if I recall, we were given the data about the speed of transmission on the Friday, and we made the announcement on the Saturday, I think, about what needed to be done. And yes, it was tough, but it was. I think it was the right thing to do.
Can I just say, I've taken a close interest in the difficulties at test and trace, and I very much welcome the remarks you made admitting that it would have been better if they had organised alongside local government and involved local government much more intensively earlier. So what is being learned from that? Because as prevalence falls, the isolation of the individual cases to suppress the virus becomes much more important and much more possible because there are far fewer cases. What has been learned from that period that is going to be implemented going forward?
Well, I think if you talk to Dido, and as I'm sure your committee has, and you listen to the people she's been working with, she's had local government leaders with her from the beginning, and I've been talking to them as well from the beginning. Could we have simply relied on local government health officials to do all the testing and all the tracing? I'm not certain that would have been sensible. I think you needed a combination, and I think that's what Dido would argue.
Thank you. We'll move forward to Yvette Cooper, Home Affairs Select Committee.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Prime Minister. Still on the lessons learned issue, last March, an estimated 10,000 separate COVID cases came into the country, mainly from France, Spain and Italy, with no UK border restrictions in place. Do you accept now that that was a mistake, and what lessons have you learned from it?
Thanks, Yvette. The UK has very tough measures in place, as you know, against people bringing virus into this country from France or from anywhere else. So if you come in the normal way from France, suppose you're a British citizen returning from France for some lawful activity, but you're not on the special list, then you have to go through a huge amount, including self-isolation for 10 days. You have to take a test 72 hours beforehand and all the rest of it, 2 tests, very considerable fines if you fail to quarantine. There is a group of people who are exempt, as you say. They are overwhelmingly in the there'll be the people who are involved in bringing in, for instance, medicines or food to the UK. And they typically turn around very rapidly and go back to France. Now, there is an issue about whether we decide to apply more stringent measures to them, with the delays that would entail, and the knock-on effects that would entail. And we're certainly looking at that, but people should be under no illusions that it would have consequences.
Okay, that's not an answer to my question, which was about whether you now felt that last year's failure to put border restrictions in place were now a mistake at a time when 130 other countries did have restrictions in place and we didn't. But let me turn then to these current arrangements. So France has 2,000 to 3,000 new cases of the South Africa and Brazil variants in place. So each day arriving. So why have you not introduced then additional measures or put France on the red list?
Yeah, we have got, first of all, by the way, we did introduce bans as soon as we knew about the new variants. I wasn't quite sure what you were referring to just now, but as soon as, so on December if we're talking about the December the 23rd measures, that we knew, as soon as we knew about the South African variant or the Brazilian variant, we applied travel bans on those countries, and those continue to be in place. And just for everybody's understanding, this is an issue about trying to keep out these variants, as I think you're driving at. At the moment, in the UK, those variants of concern and the effectiveness of the vaccines against them is still a matter of debate. But those variants of concern are not rising. The numbers are low. They're stable. I think about 350 or so in the case of South Africa, maybe 50 or so in the case of the Brazilian, and the Manaus variant much lower. So we're containing those as best we can with surge testing and with door-to-door tracing. Which is I think the right thing to do, and the situation seems to be stable. Now, in terms of putting France on the red list, which is what you're talking about, and with the consequences that would have for UK supplies and for cross-channel movements. And just remember, 75% of our medicines, 50% of our food come through the short strait. So there are consequences, but it is something that we will have to look at. We will have to look at tougher measures, just because of this ambiguity about the effectiveness of the vaccine. Well, you deserved a long answer.
You've got 20,000 people arriving from France in the UK every week. Of those, 2/3 are completely exempt from all of the testing and quarantine arrangements. Everyone understands that hauliers clearly can't be covered by quarantine and carry on doing their vital job. But why are you not testing them? You have 2,000 to 3,000 cases, new cases a day of the South Africa and Brazil variant in France. And in some parts of France, it's over 30% of the cases, and cases have been rising overall. So why are you at least not testing hauliers? Hauliers going to France are tested. You know that system works. Why are you not testing hauliers coming back into the UK?
The number of people coming into the UK overall from France has massively diminished. There is still
20,000 a week.
Massively, but it was colossal. It's now greatly reduced, and the numbers of the people who are coming in are as you rightly say, overwhelmingly those whose business is deemed essential for the security of supply of our country. I've explained that tougher measures would have very serious disruption on those trade flows, and
measures going in the other direction.
And that has
testing arrangements in place for hauliers going to France,
and that has to be balanced. And that has to be balanced.
Coming back the other direction.
That has to be balanced against the current ambiguity about the effectiveness of the vaccines on the variants. Now, I agree with you, Yvette. I agree with you that this is an issue of of concern. It wasn't until quite recently that the situation was the other way around, and we had a situation in France where things seemed more under control, and in the UK we had more of the virus prevalent. I think we now, in all seriousness, need to look at the situation at the Channel. I'm afraid we can't rule out tougher measures, and we will put them in if necessary. And yes, if it's necessary to bring in testing, then we will do so. But I think you should understand the balance between doing that, the disruption it would entail, and the risk that we're trying to address.
If you give long answers, Prime Minister, it just takes longer. Yvette's going to have another question. Sorry.
There's a series of top scientists and medics have now warned that the biggest threat to our vaccine programme and to our ability to come out of lockdown and to keep the roadmap on track is the potential arrival of new variants, particularly from South Africa and Brazil. Now, we knew about the rising numbers of cases in the middle of February. The problem is this is just one delay after another. Every time, when I asked you about Brazil last time you came before the committee, there were then still long delays in terms of getting the types of measures in place. There were long delays right back at the beginning. And you said just this week, previous experience has taught us that when a wave hits our friends in Europe, I'm afraid it washes up on our shores as well. But that's because we had no border restrictions in place. Shouldn't that previous experience have taught us that what we need is effective border arrangements to stop cases spreading?
Okay, Prime Minister. All right, Yvette, thank you.
Advised you that you need to bring in restrictions and testing on hauliers coming from France.
Thank you, Yvette.
No, that isn't. Actually, that isn't true, but thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that, Yvette. There is a balance to be struck, and what we don't know is the exact state of the efficacy of the vaccines against the new variants, and we have to balance that against the very serious disruption that is entailed by curtailing cross-channel trade. This country depends very largely for the food in our shops, for the medicines that we need, on that trade flowing smoothly. Now, we will take a decision, no matter how tough, to interrupt that trade and to interrupt those flows if we think that it is necessary to protect public health and to stop new variants coming in, and it may be that we have to do that very soon. But I would ask the committee just to think about the logical position. When you are in a state of unknowing about the potential of any possible variant around the world from coming into the country, on Yvette's logic, you would put the whole of the world into a red list and stop movement flowing freely of any kind for a very long time. And I'm not certain that is something that the UK economy, the UK public would understand and accept, because you're doing something to prohibit movements or to stop movements when you don't actually know the risk that you're trying to mitigate. What we need to see is a clearer understanding.
New Zealand, Australia,
you need to see a clearer understanding, of the risk.
Thank you, Yvette. Prime Minister, have you finished? Because we're going to go on to data now.
Those countries, with great respect, don't depend on other countries for 75% of their medicines and 50% of their food. And I hope that's a point that.
We're going to go on to the data now, because you said it's data, not dates. William Ragg, Chairman of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, which is responsible for the government's data operation. You need to unmute,
William. Sir Bernard, and good afternoon, Prime Minister. It's good to have you with us. Tomorrow you'll ask for the extension of the Coronavirus Act for 6 months, which goes past the 21st of June, step 4 of the roadmap. Why?
Thank you very much. Well, there are a number of reasons why we want to maintain. I mean, obviously the roadmap provisions, the restrictions, the lockdowns, all that ends. So people shouldn't be confused between the two things. But what we do need to do is to continue to be able to deal with the backlogs that we've built up, and to be able to, for instance, to use remote hearings for courts to clear the backlog in the courts, to make sure that people who have returned to the colours in the NHS who are volunteering can continue to practice and to serve, and there are various powers we need to ensure that education can continue to run smoothly. So those are the reasons why there are powers and differences that will persist beyond the end of the roadmap on June the 21st. But be in no doubt that after June the 21st, all the restrictions that we have, we hope, will be gone. And though remember that these are not before dates. That's their status.
Mr. Rao.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a number of provisions within the Act that the government haven't used. So, Minister, can you give an undertaking that those provisions will be dropped? There's no point extending those that you haven't used to date.
Yes, I think we've already weeded out quite a few, but anything that is redundant will go.
Thank you. Coming on to SAGE and indeed other advisory groups. At the weekend, a member of a government advisory body said that there wasn't going to be any international travel this summer. That no doubt cheered the nation immensely. Is that the policy of the government?
Who SAGE said that, did they? Sorry, forgive me.
A member of a government advisory committee.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do is on April the 5th, we'll get the findings of the Global Travel Task Force, and I'll be setting out where I see what I think it may be possible from May the 17th. You know, as Yvette was just saying, things are looking difficult on the continent, and we'll have to look at the situation as it develops.
But is it helpful to have members of these august bodies sort of freelancing across the media for decisions have been made by ministers?
I think it's one of those things that we just have to get used to. I think it's been a feature of life for quite some time.
But do you find it helped, Prime Minister?
Well, I think what it shows is a wide spectrum of scientific opinion.
So do advise and ministers decide?
Oh, yes.
Very good. Could I bring you on to COVID vaccine certification? Do you believe that the COVID vaccine certification for domestic use is compatible with a free society such as ours?
I do think that the basic concept of vaccine certification should not be totally alien to us, because after all, when you're entrusted with care of a patient, and you say you're a surgeon, you're expected to have a vaccination against hepatitis B. The principle is there. This is a particularly contagious disease. It can be very nasty indeed. We've seen what happened in care homes, as we were discussing earlier. It doesn't seem to me to be irresponsible at all far from it. It's wholly responsible for care home companies to think of requiring vaccination.
You mentioned surgeons and the care sector. That's very different to the ordinary citizen going to the pub. So do you recognise that distinction for COVID vaccine certification?
I think that's the kind of thing that it may be up to individual publicans. It may be up to the landlord.
I'm interested to know because in politics at the moment there's a great deal of time for thought and thinking. So I'm thinking back to perhaps your previous Daily Telegraph comes. I'm not going to quote from them, don't worry. But I'm wondering if the Prime Minister in those years, well, they're all excellent and I recommend it. But I cannot imagine in a past life you writing about being support of a COVID vaccine certification to go to the pub?
Well, you'll appreciate, Will, that there are other members of your committee, distinguished members such as Yvette, who take a passionately opposing view about the need for tougher measures, and I've found myself in this long national conversation thinking very, very deeply about it, and I think the public have been thinking very deeply about it. And my impression is that there is a huge wisdom in the public's feeling about this, and human beings, instinctively recognise when something is dangerous and nasty to them, and they can see that COVID is collectively a threat, and they want us as their government. And me as the Prime Minister to take all the actions I can to protect them, and that's what I've been doing for the last year or more.
A quick final question from me, if I may, Sir Bernard. Prime Minister, have you thought about a gradated scheme of sanctions for infractions of the ministerial code? Do you see the straightforward sanction or resignation of a minister to be too severe a sanction, and have you thought about introducing a range of them?
Yes, well, actually, no. Well, I hadn't thought about a range of disciplinary measures that one could take, but if you wanted to suggest, lesser punishments, then I'd be perhaps being asked to appear before this committee. I'm happy to think of. It's an interesting idea.
Is it a pleasure and not a chore, Prime Minister?
It's a pleasure. By the way, I want to say what a pleasure it is for me to appear in front of this committee, and no punishment, Sir Bernard, at all. No time. Pure unalloyed pleasure, at least on my part.
I recently gave evidence to the Committee on Standards of Public Life about the
ministerial
code, and I will send you my evidence.
Would you, that'd be most kind, thank you.
But this idea of having a less absolute binary decision for a Prime Minister receiving advice from the independent advisor does seem to me give the opportunity for the Prime Minister to sort things out and rectify matters, rather than just to get a resignation and then have the Minister back 18 months later as though nothing had happened, which seems to be a rather unsatisfactory way of system learning. And can we just move on now to the economy? There are many other questions I'd love to have asked myself about COVID. Mel Stride.
Bernard, thank you. And Prime Minister, good afternoon. Welcome to the committee. Prime Minister, do you think that these spending assumptions in the forecast that the OBR released alongside the budget are realistic?
The spending assumptions released by the OBR for the
assumptions implicit in the OBR's forecast that was released at the time of the budget, are those figures realistic?
Just remind me which particular figures you have in mind now.
The departmental capital expenditure, the standard figures that go into the fiscal output report that the forecast that the OBR produces alongside every major fiscal event, and certainly alongside the budget.
I certainly think that the OBR is right to think that the public finances are under very considerable pressure as a result of COVID, and if you mean the 407 billion expenditure that the pandemic has necessitated, then I was discussing that last night with the Chancellor and certainly agree with that.
No, I'm really referring to the forecast, which, as you know, forecasts out for the next 5 years. There are assumptions made as to what the government will be spending in each one of those. And I'm just asking whether.
Yes, I think that. Thanks. Sorry, Mel. On that point, I think what the OBR has been suggesting is that. I mean, obviously, there's things are very tough, and spending has been necessarily very extensive, but the fiscal repair measures, as it were, that Rishi took in the budget are set to work over the medium term.
Well, when you say, Prime Minister, that the OBR's figures, they are the OBR's figures in the sense that they appear in the forecast, but they're figures, of course, provided by the Treasury. So I guess my question is, are you comfortable with the government's assumptions as to the spending levels that they are expected to be over the coming years?
Yes, because I'm comfortable with it. I wish we weren't in this position. I wish we didn't have to fire hose so much money at COVID to put out the conflagration. But I think that the Chancellor's budget was extremely good and has put us back on a sustainable path.
The reason why I raise this, Prime Minister, is that there are many economists who believe that the figures that are on spending within that forecast are quite unrealistic. And Paul Johnson, for example, of the IFS, has offered a 10-to-1 against the spending assumptions being met. And that's because there are a lot of costs that one can anticipate coming down the line that are not captured within the figures that the Treasury provided to the OBR. And we've indeed touched on a number of those areas in the discussion this afternoon, things of social care commitments, for example, that were not baked into the budget. There's no explicit provision for spending on annual vaccinations beyond the current programme. We've got test and trace that we've discussed this afternoon. There's a huge backlog in our hospitals. There's nurses' pay, all the children who one presumes will need more resource if they're to catch up on lost learning, and perhaps pressure for yet a further uplift in the UC and universal credit uplift. Doesn't that leave you feeling slightly queasy about the assumptions on spending that the government's operating to, given its critical importance in terms of the actions that we take in supporting the public finances?
These were the figures that the Treasury put out in the OBR recorded, and I'm not going to make predictions now about the future, about future budgets and future spending reviews, but. What I can certainly say is I think that the UK, if we continue with the roadmap to freedom in the way that we are, and as I said yesterday, I don't see any reason there's no sign in the data that causes me to believe we're at this stage that we're going to have to deviate from that roadmap to freedom. I believe our chances of a strong recovery are very good.
How do you square that, though, with saying a little while ago that you remain committed to resolving the social care crisis, and yet we know that and there is no money in those forecasts to take that into account? Those two things, it seems to me, don't really square. But if we do accept that your statement that you do have confidence in these numbers, does that therefore mean that taxation as the total level of the tax burden in the UK will be expected not to rise? And can you make that commitment this afternoon that we shouldn't expect that what is already the highest since Roy Jenkins was Chancellor in the 1960s, that we shouldn't expect the tax burden to rise on the basis of your confidence of those figures at the moment?
I strongly believe in a low tax government, and I'm a low tax conservative. I think that's the best way forward for our country, and as we go forward, we're going to want to be as dynamic and as competitive as we can possibly be, and having the right fiscal framework is vital for that. But even the increasing corporation tax doesn't come in for 2 years, and it's the rate is still at the lowest in the G7, and it's preceded by a super deduction for capital investment, for business investment, which I think is incredibly attractive, and I hope will give people confidence and get our economy moving. And I don't think you should necessarily draw the conclusion from what's in the OBR numbers about spending that we won't have the room to make the profound changes on social care that Jeremy and I discussed earlier on.
Do you think that
very briefly,
it would not require any uplift in those numbers of spending, because they're not captured in there at the moment, and that's quite a large bill. But can I just ask one final question? You mentioned the super deduction lasts for 2 years, as we know. Thereafter, companies that currently have chronically low levels of investment, not just because of the pandemic, but because we've had a historical situation there, will then go into a situation where that support's not there and corporation tax is rising quite significantly. What is it after the super deduction has gone through in that couple of years that will be there from the government support corporates investing further?
Well, you've got a world now in which business rates are unprecedentedly low. VAT's been cut. You've got, as you know, Mel, because you've been following this throughout, huge support through C-bills, through furlough, through all the instruments the government has used. Plus, you've now got a super deduction for investment, and to say nothing of the kickstart funding for hiring people, a huge package to get the economy moving. And the purpose is to trigger confidence growth and investment and a virtuous circle.
Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hugh Merriman, the Chair of the Transport Committee. We can't hear Hugh Merriman.
You need to unmute.
Hello? Can we come back to you, Hugh? Can we sort out his sound?
He's by the looks of him, he's in Portcullis House.
We'll come back to you.
He's just down the road. Wait, he could walk in. He could literally walk in here, Bernard. I mean, we could do this incredible thing, called actual propinquity. Why don't we have it's a revolutionary concept in a COVID secure way. Hugh could come and sit.
Yes, I agree with that, Hugh. If you want to just abandon your workstation and come down here, we'll sort it out that way.
Brilliant.
Shall we move
that's cool.
Temporarily to Julian Knight now then, please. Hope we can hear you, Julian.
Thank you, Chair. It would take me a lot longer to walk from Solihull to Portcullis House. The digital culture, media and sports sectors, as no doubt you're aware, Prime Minister, are worth nearly a quarter of the UK economy. Yet post-Brexit, people in these sectors are being asked to pay uneconomic visa fees just to work overseas in the EU. They can't transport their instruments or their gear and are already being overlooked for work in favour for those who have EU passports. Why were these sectors allowed to suffer what is in effect a no-deal Brexit?
Julian, first of all, I want to say how strongly I share your frustration and the frustration of that sector. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I totally share I totally share the frustration of the sector. This is a massively important part of our economy. Contributes many tens of billions of pounds in tax revenue, in employment, and to the general joy of and productivity of the nation. It is hugely important, and they're also a massive export industry. So we must fix this, and the answer is, I'm afraid that in the course of the negotiations, the EU as a whole did not give us the deal that we wanted on this issue. Though of course we're not placing any restrictions on people coming to the UK. We're very happy to welcome performers from around the world, and that always be part of our Global Britain approach. But what we've got to do now, in the time, we do have some time, because obviously, given what we've been discussing earlier, there isn't a great hubbub of travelling musicians and theatre companies and so on around and doing gigs around the rest of Europe. That's been put on hold for a while. But we were working flat out with bilaterally with each individual government, and some of them are much better. I'm sure you know, Julian, because you know a lot about this. Some of them are much better and forward-leaning than others. Some of them, it's been absolutely fine. Others, we've still got progress to make. But one of the reasons that I've invited Nick Heitner to help us in this whole sector is so that we can get ready for a proper return to our cultural life in the autumn in the way that I think everybody would want.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for those encouraging words. What the DCMS sectors would like to hear from you is that it's a pledge to get this sorted. We're already a quarter of the way through the year, and as such, there's no bilateral talks that have taken place. When will those talks take place, and who will lead them on our side?
Well, the initiative, actually, there are plenty of conversations already happening between at national capital levels between the UK and our partners. David Frost, Lord Frost, is in overall charge of making this happen. One of the things that we're looking at doing is we've got 1.57 billion, as you know, that we put into the sector to support it in all sorts of ways, and we will want to be helping in the meantime with some of that funding.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I'm glad you mentioned Lord Frost, because he's declined 2 invitations now to appear before my committee, so perhaps you can have a gentle word.
I will.
As I understand it, it's that the heads of mission who will be undertaking the first stage of the bilateral talks. That, I think, will take too long. Will you consider short-circuiting this? Again, our ministers negotiated with ministers from Spain, Italy and Greece, which seem to be the most recalcitrant nations in terms of visa access.
Yes, I'm passionate about this. I think it was in 1620 that a group called the English Comedians performed Hamlet in German, as far as I can remember. This is something that has been going on for hundreds of years. We must get it properly ironed out. It's an obvious. It's a two-way street. We need to make sure that we get this thing totally sorted out, and our cultural life can, and our greatest cultural exports can continue to flourish.
Thank you. One final question, Chair, if I may. So it's a change in terms of COVID insurance for festivals. Every year there are 975 festivals in the UK, from Glastonbury, of course, to the Asparagus Fair in Worcestershire. But without limited government-backed COVID cancellation insurance, we risk throwing away economic advantages from our brilliant vaccine programme. Prime Minister, will you back a COVID-secure summer of fun rather than condemning us to a summer of none? I mentioned the work that Nick Heitner is leading for us. We're looking at ways that we can make this happen. Oliver Dowden, the Culture Secretary, CMS Secretary, is clearly leading on this. He's done a huge amount of work and trying to get the sector ready. I think one thing that I don't want to see is people unwilling to take risks on productions, on performances, on events, because they think about what happened last year when, as we've discussed, we thought we could get things open, and then sadly, because of the way the pandemic went, we couldn't move forward. And we remember we had a huge effort on lateral flow testing to try and move things forward. To get something ready for the autumn or for the Christmas season, even now, you have to do the rehearsals, you have to get the scenery, all that stuff. It takes a huge amount of time, preparation, and expense, and I totally get that. And so that's why we're looking at what we can do to top slice some of the 1.57 billion to see if we can be useful in that way. I mean, there are difficulties with this whole business of indemnifying the entire sector, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, and as I'm sure Mel would appreciate. But that's what we're looking at. I wouldn't suggest I wouldn't suggest indemnifying the whole sector, but a date in time limited only to the costs incurred. I think there is a way forward with this, Prime Minister. At the moment, I have to say, we're not being listened to. We have really serious proposals on this, so hopefully you will take that back.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to. Yes,
I think that was a point and not a question. But may I, as a Vice Chairman of the All-Party Music Group, just reinforce a very strong feeling in the music and performing arts that we have been slow on the uptake of the seriousness of the impact of Brexit on touring musicians and performers, and that it has looked as though we've not been prepared to listen. I've asked Oliver Dowden, the Secretary of State, to host a Zoom call of people actually who are practitioners on the front line. Can I invoke your support for this initiative of listening and gathering intelligence?
Yes, and Sir Bernard, I can think of nothing finer than to make sure that you can lead a choir of Brexiteers.
Thank you. They're not Brexiteers. They're not Brexiteers.
Tour of the continent.
But also, can I add Portugal to the list? And it is very much, many of the issues are very much confined to certain countries of concern, and it's not due to any malevolence of those countries. No. It is the bedding down of new procedures and practices which are unfamiliar to the officials in those countries.
That's entirely
so
right.
Can I ask you to not only advise Lord Frost to attend the DCMS Select Committee to address these matters, but also that there should be a Foreign Office Minister
yes,
who is going to take the fight through the embassies into campaigns in the individual countries, but it needs to be addressed country by country, otherwise we will make very, very slow progress.
It does. This is one of those opportunities for strong bilateral engagement.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for those assurances. And we'll now go to Hugh Merriman, who's been allowed to join us in person for his questions about transport.
Well, Chairman, thank you. Prime Minister, thank you for unlocking me and inviting me down to the room. Technology broke down. I want to ask about international travel.
Yes,
you've said to this committee and indeed yesterday to the public that on the 5th of April you will have more to say. Is the 5th of April the day when the Global Travel Task Force framework will be known to the public?
That's right.
And with that regard, are we likely to see a framework that just sets out the criteria, or will it be known which country goes into which criteria by the 5th of April?
I think, Hugh, with great respect, you're probably going to have to wait till the 5th of April to see the details. The hope is that we can get people moving again by May the 17th, by step 3, in the way that I've set out on the roadmap. We'll just have to see where we get to and where other countries get to, and what the data is telling us.
Okay, but it's great news because it's a week earlier than we thought the task force would publish. So can I perhaps push you? Does that mean there might be a week earlier where people can be able to start flying and travelling again?
We're sticking to the roadmap.
Okay, so I can't push you earlier than the 17th
No, and
of May.
the reason for that, I mean, I'm sure the committee knows this backwards, but the reason for that is the simple epidemiological reason that a 5-week interval is a sensible one. It gives you a chance to assess the impact of the previous changes. It'll be 5 weeks on since the April the 12th opening of non-essential retail. We need to couple with the impact of schools and everything else, and we'll need to see what that's done.
Okay, and I understand, and actually it's great news that we're here a week earlier in terms of that news. Can I perhaps ask you where we are in terms of discussions with other international leaders? Because obviously for every plane that leaves the UK it will need to land in another country. Have, for example, you had conversations with President Biden as to our ability to restart UK-US flying again at the time we're ready to be able to fly?
Well, discussing the whole time with, and I know that Grant is discussing the whole time, the Transport Secretary, with colleagues around the world when we can get things moving. But all of us are looking at the pandemic and when it's sensible to do so.
And in terms of prioritising those conversations, not asking you to give information, are you looking at the countries that are ahead of the game as we are with vaccination rollout? So again, the US is a country that seems to have marched forward in the way that the UK has in terms of those conversations, so that we have some form of agreed standard on travelling. You've said before that vaccination certificates or passports may be an inevitability. So have we had those conversations about what the framework would be in terms of rules?
I don't think that there's been an international, as it were, concordat on vaccination passports, but there's no doubt that there's a growing global consensus that for the purposes of aviation and that evidence of vaccination or immunity, that you've had the disease, or that you've taken a negative test, all of these will be valuable.
And do you regard the vaccination certification as a commercial necessity? So one that government wouldn't stand in the way of if that was the way to unlock people's ability to fly again?
Yeah, I think I'm on the, I think that there are obviously, you can either, there's a hierarchy between sort of mandating something and permitting it or forbidding it. I think that in some areas, as we were talking about earlier on, particular sectors where vulnerable elderly people are being cared for, there may be some need for mandation, some need for more permissive approach. All that will be set out in due course.
Okay. And perhaps can I also ask you, it may well be the case, due to what's going on in Europe and elsewhere, that there are certain parts of the transportation system that can't operate as other parts of the economy can by the 22nd of June. Would you be willing to look again if there are government-imposed barriers to travel, domestically and internationally, at a sector-based compensation scheme to ensure that those organisations can stay in business if they can't do business?
You mean like aviation?
Aviation, a good example, but we also had the coaches sector actually in this room this morning, and they've been particularly impacted as well.
Aviation we've supported, I think, with about £7 billion already. We're going to continue to have issues that we'll have to deal with in the aviation sector for a long time to come. The coach industry, we're supporting in all sorts of ways, not least in buying loads of green buses. So perhaps they're not so useful in the actual coach sector. But the best thing for all those sectors is to get us all moving again, and that depends on the rollout of the vaccine and defeating the virus.
Thank you. And one last question, if I may, Chair. It always seems to be the case now that the use of going abroad on holiday is a dirty word, which is absolute tragedy, given you yourself are a great internationalist, and that we've always ruled the waves in terms of our exploring abroad. How do we get this market opened up again, and how do we also get people to look beyond these shores?
I think you do not underestimate the natural wanderlust of spirit of inquiry, general dynamism of the British people that has served us for hundreds and hundreds of years. And as soon as people feel it is safe, you will see a miraculous change in the mood and in what happens. That's what this is all about. And we're getting there, as I say, step by step, jab by jab. We're not there yet, but I'll be saying more on April the 5th and then on the 12th, and we will do what we can.
And you just unlocked me for my room so I could come down here. Are you minded to unlock yourself and give yourself a foreign holiday over summer, as well as supporting, of course, the domestic holiday?
I think I will be, whatever I do, I will be making sure to tell the British public what I think is safe and sensible. I certainly won't be doing anything other than that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to, if you can indulge us, and I'm sorry, just another 10 minutes would do.
Sure.
Which is that the Chair of the Procedure Committee, Karen Bradley, would like to ask about lifting COVID restrictions in Parliament to restore the effectiveness of Parliament. Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Sir Bernard. And Prime Minister, we've just seen a real example of the hybrid Parliament working, where we've had to have a physical participation from Mr Merriman rather than virtual. But one thing that we can say about Westminster is that the House of Commons has been able to operate and has sat throughout the whole of the pandemic, unlike many other national parliaments around the world, and that's thanks to the innovation of the digital team and the House staff for being able to make this happen. But of course compromises have been required. And Prime Minister, I'm just curious, what is your view of how Parliament has operated in this last 12 months?
Well, I think it's been heroic, actually, and I think that the staff and of the House of Commons have done an absolutely unbelievable job. And don't forget that many of them, Karen, work in professions that we would, I think, looking at the way the epidemic works, think of as quite high risk, because they had to come into regular contact with large numbers of different people in close proximity. When we've seen the effects on some professions of the disease. And so I thank them very, very much for what they've done. They've kept going. I think what the public, my broad instinct is that the public would like us as parliamentarians to be returning to life pretty much as normal, pari passu, at the same pace as everybody else. And I think that's what we should go for.
Can I join you in thanking the staff of the Commons? And I think, we know we've lost some very special members of staff over the last 12 months, and we should all remember that and the work that they do. But you talked about staying in step with the roadmap out of lockdown for Parliament. Some colleagues would like to go faster. Some colleagues think that the House of Commons should show leadership, and that perhaps things like social distancing shouldn't apply in the House of Commons chamber when it does apply to the rest of the country. What's your view?
My instinct is the one I just mentioned, Karen. I would be inclined to support an approach that is adopted everywhere. The House of Commons should be like any other part of the UK. We should go. We should be meeting and mingling when it's safe to do so. When the science says that's okay.
Thank you. If I could bring us on to when we are back to some form of normality, the attrition rate for female MPs serving in the House of Commons is far worse than male MPs. We've got some figures from the House of Commons Library that indicate that women MPs serve on average one parliamentary term less than their male counterparts. Now, there may be many reasons for that, but one of them might well be down to the procedures of the House of Commons. I wonder, based on our experiences over the last 12 months and some of the things that we've done over the last 12 months, and also your experiences as parliamentarian, are there any procedural changes you would like to see that we could look at that might mean that women were able to make a successful career in Parliament, more women were able to make a successful career in Parliament?
I do actually think that we need to harvest the best things. This has been a terrible pandemic. It's been an appalling year, but we have learned to do some things quite well. And I think that technology has been definitely been our friend. And this is something that the government doesn't dictate at all. This is for the Commons. This is for MPs, for the Speaker to work out how to do it. But where there are improvements that can be made, particularly family-friendly improvements, then I'd be on for that. I think the way the Commons works has improved quite a lot, even in my time here, and that's been to the good. I think it has helped us get more female MPs, but we've got to realise there are still very considerable barriers, and some of the deterrent that female MPs face is absolutely appalling. I mean, we've discussed the online trolling, the abuse. Anything we can do to make things easier, more family-friendly, seems to me to be something that it would be sensible for the Speaker and his team to look at.
And are there any particular innovations you would like to see perhaps continue that we've tried through the course of the pandemic? I'm thinking about the way we're voting, maybe some virtual participation.
I wouldn't want to commit to any particular change, Karen. I just think that generally we should be looking, or the Speaker and the Commons together should be looking seriously at the general benefits of remote debate, the ways we're able to do things differently. I think sometimes it's worked, sometimes it's been less successful, and I've no doubt at all, speaking entirely personally, that I want the chamber to be full again. I want the people to have a sense that they can see the sentiment expressed in the room, understand where the debate is going by the sea anemone movement of the benches, and see how the argument is working, and hear the acclaim or the abuse. I think that's very, very important, and we need to learn directly from each other. I think that probably it's a good idea for colleagues to be able to mingle again in the lobbies. And so I would be inclined to, and I know it's incredibly old-fashioned, but insofar as we possibly can, I think that voting as a communal act together has immense benefits, because it's not just pressing a button. You really have to commit. You have to think about it. You have to be prepared to justify what you're doing to your friends, to your colleagues, to your whips as you go around these ancient buildings. So I hope I don't sound like a crazed traditionalist when I say I see a merit in that. But there will be things that we can do differently and better. And I really wouldn't want to be too prescriptive about that. I think a lot of people will have spent a lot of time looking at what's worked and what hasn't worked, and I'd encourage them to harvest the best.
Just one final point. You've said, Prime Minister, that this is a matter for the House, but obviously it's the government that has to provide time for debates on these matters and for the House to then be able to make a decision. Can you commit to giving some time for that debate? I'm
sure that's going to be a necessity. We're going to have to look at ways of improving our proceedings, making them more family friendly. I've no doubt about that.
Thank you.
Well, Prime Minister, as my personal view, as someone who's also committed to a 50-50 Parliament, I very much welcome your open mind on these matters. Can I just press you in particular on the proxy voting issue, which has been a great help to people who have caring responsibilities, who are, of course, mostly women. And so if we went back to the pre-COVID situation, we would in fact be re-invoking an indirectly discriminatory regime. So I hope perhaps you could just confirm that you have an open mind on that question as to whether additional proxy votes could be available for people with caring responsibilities.
I certainly think we need to be looking at measures that are family friendly. I've said what I've said about the value of voting together, but I'm sure that all MPs get that point. But the point you make is also a very good one.
Like you, I'm a traditionalist, and the last thing I want is ministers to have proxy votes so they never see the rest of the vote.
No, exactly.
That's very important. Can I just also very briefly return to the COP26 question, which is one of the top priorities of the government in this calendar year. And we've arranged for Alok Sharma, the President-designate, to appear before the different select committees that have an interest in this. But the concern that we have is that this doesn't yet look like this same consuming priority for this government as other policies. What can you do to ensure that all the government departments are engaged, all efforts are being made to secure the agreement of 190 countries, and it engages domestic policy as well?
Well, Bernard, thank you very much. And unless I specifically tell you otherwise, I want you to know that I'm engaged in some kind of COP conversation virtually every day, and that probably goes for every other Secretary of State, or certainly in many departments. There will be ministers who spend a lot of time every week now thinking about issues to do with our green industrial revolution, the 10-point plan, tackling climate change, and the COP summit. So it's a big cross-governmental effort. It's being led by Alok, but it's certainly something that we're gripping across Whitehall.
You chair the Climate Action Strategy Cabinet Committee. How often should it be meeting?
Yeah, that is one forum. It hasn't, to be frank, met a great deal because we've been doing a lot of ad hoc meetings, and that's how it's been working. I've been meeting colleagues pretty continuously over the last few months, and it will intensify because the question now really is just to make sure that we can have a COP that is physical. And to get back to the question that Karen was talking about, I really think it'd be a wonderful thing if by November the UK can lead the world in all sorts of things, but actually have a summit that is a big global summit where everybody turns up, and everybody turns up without fear.
Prime Minister, thank you very much. You've given us a great deal of time, and
thank you.
We've covered a lot of ground. We're looking forward to seeing you towards the end of the summer term and then again in the autumn. I'm very grateful for the time you give this committee. It's a great help to the work of the select committees. Order, order.
Thank you, Sir Ballot. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.